space battles became more amazing with each new Star Wars film. By the time this scene was put together, one man had become the specialist in choreographing shots like these. Ken Ralston created most of the battles in Return of the Jedi. He and Bill Kimberlin, his editorial assistant, have put together the most complex special effects shot ever made. It's the 19th shot in the space battle, called SB-19. Lucas wanted it to be spectacular. This is SB-19 in slow motion. There are 63 separate spaceships on the move. It was Bill Kimberlin's job to organize them into a convincing scene.
Fighters coming in.
Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of Collection Wars. How you doing, Michael?
Man, happy Saturday, everybody. I'm doing great, man. This is an exciting show. I'm like a little kid right now. You know, I'm trying to be professional at the same time.
I know, right? I know. We got a very, very special guest, right? Bill Kimberlin, who is honestly a legendary FX editor, worked on so many franchises that we all love, like obviously like Star Wars, right? Return of the Jedi, Cocoon, I mean, Who Framed Roger Rabbit, but Back to the Future movies, Star Trek Part 3, right? I mean,
yeah. Okay, yeah, Schindler's List. I know. This guy. Yeah,
we're gonna go through everything, and I'm just so excited and so thankful that he, decided to come join us for today.
Absolutely, it's an absolute pleasure to have him on board. What do you think, brother? Boom!
Look at that.
Does this look like I'm on the set at ILM right now, or what?
It's crazy. Yeah,
I know.
Huge, man.
Man, I'm tired of this thing sitting in the garage, man. I gotta get this thing displayed. But I thought I'd spin Collection Wars with my Star Destroyer tonight.
I love it, man.
Yeah, man.
Cool. Well, we got a bunch of buddies on here already. We got Primetime Reviews. We got Evan here. What's up, Ken? Got Scott. What's up, Scott?
What's up, guys?
Yeah, Kelvin, Jose, Left Coast. Man, our usual buddies. But so let's bring on Bill.
Yeah, super cool. Let's say hello to Bill.
Hi, fellas.
Hey, buddy.
Thanks for having me on your show.
Man, it's good to have you here.
Yeah, thanks for joining us, Bill. Really appreciate it. We've been geeking out a little bit, going through some of your work, trying to get kind of a refresher course on all the stuff you worked on. Man, it's
crazy.
Crazy. You honestly have had your hands in most of the major franchises that we all love.
Yep.
Well, as somebody said to me the other day, you worked on all the films that I loved as a kid. It just so happens that I worked on a lot of movies that still hold up. I mean, Star Wars and Schindler's List and Saving Private Ryan and the Star Trek movies. And you mentioned Roger Rabbit. That was one of the most fun projects for me because, for one thing, it was 2 years, and I never worked on a single film for 2 years.
Wow.
And this was a Disney film that was supposed to bring Disney back as a major motion picture company. And they had bet the studio lot practically on this $50 million movie about a cartoon character who no one had ever heard of. Roger Rabbit. Who's Roger Rabbit?
True.
But once that thing got out of the box, I mean, they sent me to New York. We all went to New York, and it was going to be premiered at Radio City Music Hall. But before going to see the movie, we met for a dinner, and all the big shots were there, the directors, the producers, the publicity people, everybody. So as I'm walking down the street to go to this dinner thing before the screening, I walk into a newsstand, back when they used to have newsstands, and I saw all the major, Time, Life, Newsweek, all the newspapers, everybody had Roger Rabbit on the cover. And so I scooped him up and, was just ambling down the street. And I walk into the room and I say, "Look, fellas, your movie's on the front of everything." Well, they had not seen any of this yet. They
That's
nothing.
cool.
And they practically leapt at me and tore it out of my hands. I have a picture of the Newsweek. It still has their greasy fingerprints on it. And they said, "Well, why didn't you get more copies?" And I said, "Hey, I'm the guy who did the visual effects. You got don't you have a publicity department or something that should be doing that?" But anyway, the reviews were so good. They were reading them out loud, where we're having a cocktail or a glass of wine, and everything calmed down after that. It was pretty obvious that this was going to be a smash, which it was.
It was. So Bill, I guess to kind of also start off, so what can you tell us about kind of what got you into the industry and kind of what, how did you start working in that? I know you were a director at first, right? You were in filmmaking, but can you give us a little backstory on how you got into
I was born in San Francisco and I grew up in Marin County, which is just across the Golden Gate Bridge from the city. And I had a apartment in a town called Ross. I lived with my great aunt for a while, and she was always having me take things next door to her neighbor, Mrs. Hickman. And whenever I went over there, Mrs. Hickman's television was on full blast 24/7. And I came back and I said to my aunt, "Well, what's going on with Mrs. Hickman over there?" And she said, "Oh, Bill, you're too young to remember, but that's Bessie Barrowscale." And she was one of the biggest silent screen stars in the nation for about 10 years. And the reason she has the television set on is because TVs in those days ran a lot of movies as filler because they didn't have that much original programming. So she could find her old films because they were desperate to run anything. You can't just run the test pattern. And these would be old silent films. They would be old sound films. Her husband was a film director, and she would see her buddies like Mary Pickford. And so there wasn't any TV guide at that time, so you just had to keep it on. If there was no film societies and no places you go, there was no DVDs or VHSs. So she stuck it out. And so the reason I tell that story is because if you've never had any experience with Hollywood, your uncle doesn't work at Paramount and this kind of thing, it puts that possibility in the back of your brain somewhere. The other thing was my mother took me to visit the set that was being shot of Blood Alley, starring John Wayne, and there was an old Chinese shrimping village out behind the Civic Center in Marin County, and so we went out there, and they had tricked it out to look like a real possible city in China. And there was a giant stack of boulders on the side of the set. And as I walked by, I bumped them with my shoulder and they moved. And I thought, well, how can they move? Well, that was my introduction to practical effects because they were made out of paper mache or something. And that also got in my brain. So later, when I went to film school and I started making films, I put some of these things together. I was able to look up Betsy Barrowscale and look up the movie Blood Alley and John Wayne. All this was true. Something I remembered. got out of school, was lucky enough to get a post-production job in San Francisco, originally as a sound technician, and then I worked my way up to film editor, and I made a couple of films, one on the black boxing champion Jack Johnson, who fought the Great White Hope, and the other was a drag racing movie, sort of a la Americana and American Graffiti's drag racing scenes. And that has been very successful. It was distributed all over the United States, all over the world, really. And I still sell DVDs at $25 a pop because nobody else was out there filming them.
I watched a lot of that, Bill.
So
I watched a lot of that last night. By the way,
okay.
your film with the drag racing, I watched all that. I love seeing all those beautiful women from the 70s in their little.
That's one of the most popular segments, the girl segment, and that has, I think it has almost like a million views.
Yeah, I saw that. I saw that.
It's pretty wild. And so, anyway, I once asked, because on the front of the DVD box, I printed a quote from one of the people who like it, and he said, "I watched it every day for a year. Just ask my wife." And as a friend of mine said, that should read ex-wife. I watched it every day for a year. Okay, so I asked somebody once, why are you guys so crazy about it? And they said, because it's like going to the races, Bill. It's like going to the races. You put that in your DVD and you're at the races. So anyway, I showed that film at ILM before I worked there, and it was like, Friday beer night. Everybody's done work, and they would run a film. They ran mine, and about 2 minutes into it, somebody yelled out, "Has George seen this?" And I was working there a couple of months later.
That's awesome.
Wow. That's really cool. And Bill, that movie obviously is American Nitro, right?
Right. And it has the craziest graphics and the craziest driving that you just don't see now. I mean, that's why it's a big nostalgia item, because this world doesn't exist anymore.
Yeah, it's not like it used to be.
And I know, I mean, George Lucas is a big race fan, right? Race car fan.
He went out when he retired after Jedi. He went out and went to the racetrack and hired somebody to teach him how to be a race car driver, and
I remember that.
bought a Ferrari. I mean, he had an old Ferrari already, not a really fancy one, and out at the ranch in his in the archive building are his old cars, like the one he had. He had an old Camaro, and then he's got the Ferrari there, and then he got some cars that some major Japanese companies gave him.
Yeah.
And one of the funny things I heard from one of the stagehands, he said that after Empire Strikes Back came out, they said, we all knew that it was a success, but because George bought a new set of tires for his car.
Very conservative guy.
Yeah, really is.
Yeah.
So Bill, so then you started working in ILM around the time, obviously, of Revenge of the Jedi, right?
I was hired to work on the space battle in Revenge of the Jedi, and I was told that always be revenge to me, because I've got all the T-shirts and the coffee cups and stuff that say revenge. And they seem to want someone who was not just used to focusing on a single shot, like a matte painting or something. And I had been an editor and knew about sequences and the importance of integrating this one shot into something larger. And I think they kind of wanted to have some of that experience leak over into the work. I would make a temp shot in black and white, 35 millimeter. I'd send it over to George's cutting room, and then I'd get his notes. And in this case, he's saying, add a rebel ship, and then there's my notes and my little X's and O's saying, there should be a dogfight here, and this should be happening, and so that's continuity. That's when he sees the shot cut in, even in this temp, he then can judge. It's just hard to judge from just a storyboard. You need something that moves. And one of the things George did on the original Star Wars is he cut in all this World War II fighter pilot stuff, in the those great sea battles that you used to see on television when you were a kid. The guns on the ship are bam, 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 and they touch the Japanese plane, and then back to the fighter pilots expression. And George wanted it to be moving so fast you would miss a lot and you'd come back to see it again. And he also could get away with a lot of stuff because he was faking everything he could. That's the thing about George. He knows how to make a movie. And most people don't realize that a lot of directors, they're great directors, but they don't actually know how to make a movie themselves. You could send George off with 300 pounds of film, and in 3 months, he could come back with a movie, and he had shot it and edited it and done the sound and everything. He could do that. Whereas Spielberg once said, I tried to edit this thing, and then I was down on the floor chasing the splicing tape, and, so I leave it to others. And that's his thing. He's a brilliant director. They work in different ways. I just, think George gets props for he could do it himself, and that's also why he's a stickler for stuff. So I'm sitting in front of a chem once, and he was running this sequence, and somebody said, "Oh, that jumped the line." There's the idea that if something comes in from the left, then it has to exit on the right. And he just says, "That's film school stuff. We're making a movie here."
Wow. So, Bill, what was it like being in a room with George Lucas? I mean, obviously this is just, Gabe, fantastic conversation. This is so exciting. But when you're sitting in a room, I know you sat behind him quite a bit in the cutting sequences and whatnot. What was it like? Were y'all collaborating back and forth quite a bit?
Well, there would be a lot of discussion. The row that George is in, he's sitting next to a little light stand there. And there's also a bunch of pointers. In other words, a little handheld thing that shines in this case, a V up on the screen that he can move around and point out things that are, and the other supervisors, they would run, Richard Edlund's sequences with George, and then Ken Ralston's, and then Dennis Muren's, and there would be collaboration going on between the principals, and everyone was there so that they could absorb and not just be only looking at their own stuff, with binoculars. They could get the sense of what they're working on and how it fits into all of this. Right. And they could hear the discussions. And at the beginning, it was hard to understand what they were talking about when you came in. But after you were there for a few years, I mean, both myself and another editor, we went to the eye doctor, and our testing was off the charts. And I remember my eye doctor said, what the hell do you do for a living? And I said, well, I sit in the screening room all day and I watch all these details, and we're looking for errors, and we're running the film in loops, and then we're actually flopping the film in the projector so that we get a fresh idea of it, because like they teach bank tellers to spot a forgery, you need to turn the signature upside down and look at it there and compare it to in the old days, the signature card. Well, that's what we were doing. We were trying to do anything to refresh our eyes so we could see things new and try and perfect them, try and get them better.
Yeah.
And George would add things because he was always wanting something over. And we're looking at a big matte painting of Jabba's palace, the famous one with the two characters out front. Yeah. So below you see the matte painting with the space
Mm-hmm.
for the live action characters. And this is how you get a sense of scale in a scene. There's no other way to do this. You can't build a giant door, but you can build a pretty big matte painting door and then seamlessly put the R2 and C3PO in there.
Mm-hmm.
So then I think it was on this scene, George said, there should be something going on over in the other corner. And he put somebody, came up with this weird little creature that's moving around, sticking his tongue out, whatever he's doing.
Yeah. The
And
little frog.
we always used to say when we did these films and we were looking at them, is this good enough? We had three ways that we identified films: temp, which could be often black and white, CBB, or final. A CBB meant it could be better. However, it's good enough to go in the movie if we run out of time and can't have time to redo it. And often we would find the time and redo it. But the whole idea was to try and not disappoint that little kid in Japan who was writing us letters about these scenes where he's found some error and what are we going to do about that? And Ken would say, okay, let's do it one more time for that little kid in Japan.
And funny enough, that little kid in Japan is pretty much us and this collectors, right? We look at all the little details and try to spot like all the like little like mistakes and all that.
Imperfections.
We all grew up kind of looking at that, right? Because after you watch the movies, then you start kind of getting into the little details and starting to look in the backgrounds and all that. So we're definitely those type of fans. but hey, Bill. So obviously, I mean, one of the biggest scenes, because Return of the Jedi is my favorite out of the original trilogy, and
Okay.
I know. I mean, obviously, one of the biggest kind of most complex scenes. You worked on, like you pretty much did it, right? And can you go over that a little bit, which is this scene, right?
Right. So that actually,
Or no?
I'm not sure this is SB19, but it doesn't make any difference. This is how we would do. We would make a cell,
Mm-hmm.
just like an animation cell that's punched at the top.
Mm-hmm.
And so it fits on there. You see, I think you see a little X where the ship is bleeding through the Falcon. I don't see it here myself.
I don't see it. Yeah.
It's in there somewhere.
Interesting.
That's crazy.
That's so cool. Now, Bill, I noticed I was going through some of your interviews and I saw either a photograph or something that it was an instruction that the ship needed to come off the screen, but the blue screen needed to stay on. Right? Is that a technique?
There's a sign in one of the photos in my book, and it says ships should always exit screen fully, but not the blue screen. Don't have the ship go off the blue screen because it will disappear.
Yeah.
And but don't stop it on the last frame of the shot.
Yeah.
We need it to exit because otherwise you've got a problem. You'd have to cut that frame off because it'll just halt. And so then I have this original thing that was hanging on the wall. I went around and took some of this stuff down and saved it because it had like the camera crew's comments. If one of them says something like, "These are orders from Uncle George" or something, he's getting all this stuff in his cutting room, and he's saying,
Yeah.
"What the hell is that? I can't use that."
What was
So
the time for, I'm sorry, Bill, to cut you
the
off.
thing was that the fact that we were able to hold together a crew that George could work with, that he was comfortable with,
Mhm.
over a period of time, because um, so he would essentially hire us out to other projects in between the time that he got his next movie idea, or it was time to make uh, the prequels or whatever it was. Go
Mhm.
go and start working on Indiana Jones. He could come back with all these people that he knew,
Yeah.
and uh, then the other thing was he was very reticent man. In other words, my friend who had worked there longer than I had said
Mhm.
he came up to George in the hallway one day, stuck out his hand and said, "George, I worked for you for 2 years and I've never met you." And he said, George practically jumped backwards because he was not comfortable
Yeah.
with people he didn't know. Once he got to know you,
Yeah.
I could sit down next to him at lunch and ask him questions or kibitz
Yeah.
just like anybody else. Uh,
Mhm.
and that was also the thing about, we used to go and get a donut from next door after dailies. And my first week there was the week of George's birthday. And so I'm sitting at Foodles getting some coffee and a roll. And George walks in. He goes over, gets a styrofoam cup, pours himself a cup of coffee, pays for it, and walks out the door. And I'm a little astonished, and I thinking to myself, doesn't this guy have somebody to go get him a cup of coffee? But that wasn't what it was about. It was about trying to live a normal life when,
Yeah.
you're not in a normal world anymore, because you're
Yeah.
famous and people are stopping you and asking you
Yeah.
questions and wanting your autograph and all this stuff.
Right.
Especially at that point, because
Yeah.
Empire
Uh,
had already
so
come out, and
Exactly. And so in Marin County, pretty much, and to this day, people understand that. They let him live his life. He goes to when his kids were little, he'd go to the school board meetings and talk to the other parents. And when you lose the ability to have privacy and all, uh, that's not good. And he didn't like living in Los Angeles. He would be anxious to get back home here
Mhm.
because it was a real world.
Yeah. Um, hey Bill, so you sent a couple pictures over. This one just caught my eye.
That's
Right?
cool.
Is this what?
That was something that was hanging in what we called lineup.
Mm,
Lineup room was that room that you saw me in earlier working on this
mhm,
old-fashioned VistaVision moviola. George bought all this VistaVision stuff
mhm,
off of Hollywood. They had developed VistaVision because they were trying to compete against television. And so
mm,
they said, okay, we'll put up an image. VistaVision is 4 times bigger than a regular 35 millimeter piece of film. We'll put up an image, let television top
mm,
that.
yeah.
And so, in order to get quality when you're going through so many generations, when you're doing these composites,
Mhm,
even though the way we did it was you took a piece of raw stock, you burned a spaceship in it, and then you ran the raw stock back in
mhm,
the optical printer, burned a different ship in.
mhm,
They were like handmade. So this is I pulled this off the wall of the lineup room. It's probably drawn by Joe Johnston, who was our art director and now is a famous film director in his own right. And this is to keep people on the same page, as far as this is the Falcon, this is how fast it travels, this is its size relationship to other ships.
mhm,
So just keep that in mind, because, of course, scale in visual effects
mhm,
is extremely important. And
Mhm.
mhm,
when you remove your spaceship from the blue screen by, sucking the blue out and having just a
mhm,
spaceship against clear plastic, in the negative, in a sense. You now have control over that
Mhm.
element, and you have a light pass and an engine pass and what we call the beauty pass being the ship itself.
Mm.
So in printing, if you wanted to increase the brightness of the lights, you
Mhm.
could do that independent of the ship. You could keep the ship dark and bring up the lights or bring up the engines. You
Mm.
had control because you were shooting uh, with these motion control cameras,
Mhm.
which could repeat the movement exactly the same every time. And once you got a move that you liked
Mhm.
and you had done test film, we called them RARs. They were really fast process black and white VistaVision strips. Once those were approved, you thought, okay, the cameraman said we've got it. They'd
Mm.
load in color film and then shoot that same movement. And the negative would go to the lab that night and we'd watch it the next morning.
And
And if the director approved it, there's where it went. That's me working on some of these shots with these RARs. You can see they're black and white
Mhm.
against clear, and I'm lining them up literally against
Wow.
uh, other ships, trying to find a lineup
Yeah. Jeez.
of a sequence that makes a sort of a choreograph
Yeah.
sense. Now, of course, George has figured all this out, and Joe Johnston has drawn it out,
Mm.
and the cameramen have shot it. Uh, but I'm nailing it together. So it's a
How long
collaborative
how
thing.
long did it take you, Bill, to do that?
The big shot SB-19, my boss said, when I finished it, he said, I thought we'd be chewing over this shot for months. I think it took a month or a month and a half, something like that.
Wow.
And I don't know, it was about as far as you could go, I guess, with an optical
Yeah.
printing world. And but when they redid it for the
Special edition.
advanced special edition versions, the
Mhm.
guy that was going to put it together for that, uh, he came and he wanted my crossover sheet, and I couldn't find the damn thing. I folded it up and stuck it somewhere,
Yeah.
and I wanted to save it, and so I'm sorry, Mike. I found it later, but it was too late for you.
That's funny.
Oh
I,
man.
what a great feeling it must have been to sit down with the gang on probably a private screening and see all of the hard work that was put into that. That's really, really awesome.
Well,
Yeah.
where that came off the most is we made these Academy reels to run for the Academy Motion Picture or Arts and Sciences, and in our category, which would be special visual effects, and we would be up in competition with all these other companies.
Mhm.
So we would cut these reels. I cut the reel for Cocoon, and I didn't cut it for Jedi, but a lot of the films I would cut the Academy reel, and then that's all they were used for. No one ever has seen these things, as far as I know, unless ILM has digitized them and put them on the internet. But I thought, well, what a shame, because like the one for Empire Strikes Back, I never showed that. I don't care how big of a big shot it was, I showed it to. They were like, wow, when they
That's
got,
cool.
because what it is, it's all the effects shots cut together, fairly artistically.
Yeah.
And it was when you had those walkers, cut with the planes and it's all moving back and forth, and then you jump to another sequence. There's no talking, there's just one thing after another flowing. And even a bad film like Pearl Harbor was kind of a not much of a story, but some of the effects in that were
Mhm.
fabulous. And that's one of besides Empire, that's one of the best visual effects reels I ever saw because
From
they built some incredible sections of ships
yeah.
of aircraft carriers. And
Yeah.
just a section, they put it on these giant crane gimbal things and have uh, the sailors hanging on to the
Yeah.
ship.
Well, so So definitely, I think let's talk about your obviously ILM. You worked at ILM for
20 years.
decades, right? Yeah, 20 years. What is this? What came with the watch, or what is this, Bill?
That came tied to a gift that I still have somewhere, but I wanted to in the book I just wanted to show there was some personal uh, thing between George and his employees. Like after, uh, let's see, after the let's see, Phantom Menace, I guess it was. He sat down out on the one of the stages and signed anything that an employee had
Oh,
to lay in front of him. He
yeah.
was there all day. He could have been there 6 or 7 hours,
Jeez.
and he would send. We all had a piece of uh, Jedi, a little piece, and I've got a nice letter from him saying, I don't often get to thank you guys, but here's a you'll like this.
Mm-hmm.
And so, he announced there was going to be something in our Christmas stocking there. And so there were every year we would get something. I have a I have a bathrobe that says ILM. I've got a bunch of crew jackets. I've got,
Right here.
you know, I
Wow.
never got slippers, but I got a watch. I've
That's,
never worn the watch, but um, I thought, well, everybody that worked for the company always liked the magician.
mhm,
And as I told someone earlier, um, if you look at our location in San Rafael, where
mhm,
our special effects company, Industrial Light and Magic,
mhm,
was, or where it was in Los Angeles, the original one, if you were to look on a zoning map, a real estate zoning map, the
mhm,
area where we were would be classified light industrial. So
mhm.
all George had to do was add the word magic, and he had a company name. And he was always naming things. There was a company in LA that we did a lot of work with. It was just a building down there, and
Mhm.
it's called the Egg Company because it used to be, I guess, an egg factory or something.
That's funny.
Man, that's a great story, right, Gabe?
Yeah, the
Uh,
easy to name it. So Bill, so you obviously in your time you worked on some of our favorite films, but one of our favorite films that we always talk about is Back to the Future, and you worked on all three of those, right, Bill?
Right. And that those movies had some of the best scripts writing that I've ever seen. I mean, to keep all of this straight in the even just in the writer's mind, and then to translate it into a movie that the audience can follow. You're you're going back into the future, and you're meeting your mother, and then you're going back, into the old west, and you're in a bar room. And I actually went up to the set. They had a set up in the Sierras near Jamestown, I think, and because they had an old locomotive there that they could rent, that was a tourist thing, and they built a part of the western town, and there was a western bar room. And so I went in there and had somebody take my picture at the bar.
Mhm.
And so occasionally you got to do fun stuff like that.
Yeah.
Go down to the Hollywood, go down to the studio, and see uh, some of those studio lots are pretty interesting. And
Mhm.
I remember you get into the cafeteria,
Mhm.
and if we all think we've seen Pretty Girls, but the selection that finally gets to a studio lot and onto the commissary is at some other worldly level. And so it was just in passing fun to see that, and some of the old uh, star dressing rooms,
Mhm.
Sinatra's, and
Yeah.
um, von Stroheim's and some of these things. If you're a movie buff and you've
For
seen
sure.
all these things, that's kind of fun too.
So,
Yeah.
Bill, considering that you worked on Back to the Future and part 1, 2, and 3, if you had to choose, me and Gabe have this ongoing thing about Back to the Future and what movie we think is the best out of the 3. What would you say is your favorite out of the 3?
I think it would be the first one for me. It's just so clever, and also in the case of Star Wars, I think Empire. That's my favorite
Yeah,
because it
yeah,
has some political stuff in there a little bit that makes it fun as far as the story. They had a crackerjack screenwriter, and it's just the ability to write those screenplays and have those stories hold together, especially with Back to the Future. Um, that takes a lot of talent and a special kind of talent.
for sure.
And I remember working on Gangs of New York, and there was a while there where um, it was so over budget, and it was the producer who's now in jail is causing so much trouble for Martin Scorsese. Martin would have been fired 5 times if he didn't have, you know, Spielberg and Lucas behind him. That was not going to happen.
Yeah,
But they were driving him crazy. I remember him saying to his editor, um, "You got to keep them away from me." And that's
yeah,
supposedly the producer's job, is to keep the studio guys on Jaws. I remember Richard Zanuck was giving them a lot of trouble because they were behind, and he called up the studio and he says, "If I see one Learjet land at Martha's Vineyard Airport, I'm shutting this picture down." Now, a studio does not want to hear that something they're working on is going to be shut down. He knew what to say to protect Steven.
yeah. That's
But,
cool.
so I'm not sure how we got onto that, but
Do you have some cool stories with Steven Spielberg?
let's see. Let me think about that for a minute. I'll tell you a story about how I went down to sell a screenplay to Hollywood because I had heard of Mike Manavoy, who was a major producer in Hollywood. He came to a film festival in San Francisco and he said, "You young film students, your job is to get in to see me, but you can't get in to see me." And I thought, I can get in to see him. I know how to do it. So
Me, I
I
would
went
do.
down there. I studied the situation. I saw that the uh, the young execs that weren't important enough to have their own parking spot parked off the lot, and they would walk past the guards very arrogantly with their secretary a few steps behind, and the guards would just wave them in. So I got a suit and everything, and my girlfriend carrying my my briefcase. And when they started to question me, I just, did what they did. Look, don't bother me, walk right past. And so I got into Metavoy's office, and he had a temp secretary that day. And I said, want to see, Mr. Metavoy. And she said, "Well, I don't see your name here." And
Wow, that
I said,
sounds
"Well,
so familiar.
there's no problem because." So she buzzed him for him, and he came out, and he actually had his arm around me. And, "What can I do for you, Bill?" And I walked in, and it's like Oriental carpets and really beautiful furniture and stuff. And I started talking to him about my screenplay, and he started getting this weird look on his face. And but I went out and I went back. I called my agent. I had a sort of a relationship with an agent, and first I walked into the first uh, phone booth that I could find. And when I got in there, I realized it was a prop. There was no phone. It was just and I was embarrassed, and I thought, I got to get out of here. I look like an idiot. So I went off the lot, past the guards, found a phone booth, called this agent, and I said, I just left Mike Medavoy's office, and et cetera, et cetera. And then my change fell through on the phone. And he says, "Does Mike have a payphone in his office now?" And so I said, "Well, I'm just outside the office." Okay, we'll check it out. So I went back to the Beverly Hills Hotel. We always stayed in the lot. We didn't stay in the Beverly Hills Hotel, but we would stay in the lobby, and they would let you get your messages there. So there was a message from Mike Medavoy's office for me, and it was not a happy message. It was like, "We're never going to look at your stuff again," yada yada. They did the same thing. Spielberg did the same thing. He snuck
He
on.
did. He snuck on Universal.
And so I called my friend who worked in Hollywood for a long time, and I said, "Steve, what have I done?" And he said, "Did you punch him, Bill?" I said, "Of course I didn't punch him." He says, "Can't be too aggressive in Hollywood." So I kind of stopped worrying about it.
Yeah, that's hilarious. I tried that one time, Bill, and I left Lucas Ranch in handcuffs.
Oh, God.
Yeah. You were probably at the ranch. Who knows? I don't know.
It was around noon. I was in there somewhere having lunch. Or after George bought the Paramount photo library, they had this incredible library of still photos of all kinds of stuff. In other words, it was reference. If you wanted to know what the inside of a 1920s barbershop looked like, they had it there. You could
cool.
Go through the stills and pull it out, and you see. That fascinates me. So I spent a lot of time there, researching stuff, and I got a kick out of it. And then there were other amenities at the ranch too that were kind of fun.
Does Lucas? I'm sorry, real quick, Gabe. Hey, and Gabe might even know the answer to this. Since Disney took over, did Lucas keep the assets of the ranch? Does he still own the property at the ranch?
The ranch is his, and he rents space to them.
I gotcha. Good. Because you mentioned his cars being there and stuff, and I know all of the in the archives. I think that's all his too, that he's going to put in his new museum.
They're getting shipped to the new museum, right?
Yeah, I think it'll probably be somewhat of a rotation thing. Like in the main house, he's got a beautiful Norman Rockwell hanging over the fireplace, and I don't think he wants to lose that. But he could, like everybody else does, they loan things on a circulating basis, and he's got so many paintings and things of it's a museum of narrative art, comic books, movies, illustrations. Rockwell, who all the big shot art critics don't like, and they're starting to rethink, I think. And he got thrown out of Chicago and San Francisco trying to build the thing.
Yeah.
It's a $1 billion edifice. I've taken photos of how far along they are now. They're getting close.
Yeah.
And it's self-funded. The guy that runs it, that's going to be the director, he doesn't have to spend his life raising money because the money's already there.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and I think USC owned the property, right, that it's built on. So they're like,
yeah, I'm not that familiar with Los Angeles, but isn't it next to the LA Coliseum sports thing? It's in the parking lot area of that.
Yeah, which I think is across the street, right, from USC.
Oh, okay. Well, that would be interesting. I know that he's happy that it's near a bunch of schools because he wants kids to see this stuff and understand that telling stories is important, and it's one of his big learning tools.
Hey, Bill, I wanted to go over a couple of other little pictures that I have here really quick. See if you could kind of walk us through.
Okay, this was about 6 feet long, And it is, again, one of these comparative sizes things for everyone working on the movie. This is how high the gorilla is. This is how high Bob Hoskins is. This
Mhm.
is how high Betty Boop and uh, 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 Bugs Bunny and uh, the waiters who uh,
Yeah.
are penguins. This is the relative size of them all, and it goes as every character in the movie, and it's again something that I saved out of the trash because I just didn't want this to go away.
Yeah.
I've tried to the things that are in my movie collection, the things that I think are important, are
Mhm.
things that have to do directly with the creative process. This is something here, like the crossover sheet and the size of the ships and all, that demonstrate how we were thinking about these things and what we were doing, what led to the creation of these movies.
Mhm.
It's like when I say that there were a lot of people, unusual people that worked at ILM because they came from around Marin County and they were very talented. But there was a guy who used to be a cable car conductor, and there was a guy whose grandfather invented the Yellow Pages, and there was a guy who was a champion skier on the Swiss ski team, and he did one of the opening stunts on a James Bond film. And
Oh, wow.
there were all kinds. There was a ex um, Green Beret. There was who was also a screenwriter, and I always felt that these personalities somehow leaked into the movies.
Mhm.
And I could tell that the talent, the actors that came, no matter how famous they were, I mean, Paul McCartney was there, and he would kibitz with these people because they were real people.
Yeah.
They weren't Hollywood family people. Although, I have nothing against Hollywood families. They've
Yeah.
been there for years, but these were uh, somehow artists in their own right.
Yeah. Man, that's so cool. And then obviously we talked about it a little bit, but you worked on Mars Attacks, which is one of my
Oh,
favorite films. Funny enough.
yeah. So um, I got a chance to get a photo uh, on the set, and I tell you, when they question you, it can be quite painful. So you better have the right answers.
I didn't have the right answers on the ranch. That's why the security guard had me escorted out of there pretty quick, but I still tried to come back.
What about this
I
line?
love this one.
Yeah. So a lot of people don't realize the original ET was a puppet,
Right.
and so again, there was an opportunity to get my picture taken with some of these iconic figures, and I'm all about uh, the saving what we can of the history of how it was done, and um, so this really, to me, is not just a memento, but it tells a story. I mean, you can
Absolutely.
see what this creature actually is, and to get this guy as a puppet on a bicycle built, I think, by Mike Fulmer, who built the plane in for Indy.
Mm.
Um, when it hits the top of the mountain, when the kid is yelling, "No more parachutes" and stuff. I mean, we shot that out in the parking lot between the two buildings and ran the plane on a wire.
Oh,
Uh,
gee.
and when ET on that bicycle is going against the moon in that famous shot where he goes up into the air, uh, there was one of our fellows in the optical department got an Oscar, largely because of his work on some of those composites, which were extremely difficult to um, hide the matte lines and to make it, seem believable.
Yeah.
Man,
So
that's a
that's
great
what that
story.
represents to me is, the
Yeah.
the behind the scene of
Yeah.
making. Because one time I was there on a Saturday and there was a guy came in to fix the phones and he had his little kids with him.
Mhm.
And I thought, this was at a time when every video store in the country didn't have, a Darth Vader prop, in the lobby. And went to the guy and I said, "Can I take your kids and show them Darth Vader and C-3PO?" And he said, "Yeah, I guess." So I took him in there, and we had a thing called a rubber room, which had a bunch of very strange looking things like ET here.
Mhm.
And it was rubber molding of creatures. And then we had a big model shop, but then there was an area where we had sort of the Darth Vader, a 7-foot mannequin, and we had 25 uh, 3CPOs and R2D2s. Uh, but so I took the kids in and I showed them this stuff, and I didn't get quite the bang had expected out of them. Because when you see Vader without the James Earl Jones voice and without the music and without the lighting, etc., it's a mannequin in a suit. I mean, it's impressive to a little kid, I guess, but
Right.
still, takes a lot to make that uh, thing happen with all those elements of Van Burt's sound effects and Williams' music and.
Yeah. Hey, Bill. What is this little 3PO?
Yeah, I saw
That is
that
what
too,
you
Gabe. I
get
was like,
when you work 20 years for ILM.
Oh, that's cool.
wow.
Like a
So
little
down there
Oscar.
on the band, yeah, they got it as close to looking like an Oscar as they could without it being an Oscar. And down there it says something. It has my name and it says something 20 years.
Oh,
Work.
that's
That's my equivalent of that's my gold watch from ILM, I guess.
I mean, obviously it's a small crew that can say, they
They
have
have that.
Yeah, I was there for it was supposed to be like an 8-month job.
Mhm.
I'm like the man who came to dinner and never went home. Just one picture after another started hitting.
Yeah.
And the thing about that is uh, we were making a film called Dragon Slayer, which had this just fabulous work in it. Phil Tippett's animation of these dinosaur-like
Mhm.
creatures that are dragons. But and at the same time, we were working on this little movie that nobody had ever heard of called E.T. And Spielberg didn't want to spend very much money. He didn't shoot it in this division, and we thought, well, if he doesn't think much of it, we don't think much of it too, either. And then, the employees all got to see the movie before it came out. Uh, towards the just before when they were just doing the trailers and sending out the publicity, we'd see the films. Everybody from the janitor all the way up, didn't matter who you were, you got to go with your family to see the movies. And so we ran it in Corte Madera Theater, big, beautiful theater. And then next weekend we ran the other one, ran Dragon Slayer, which we were all agog over, and then we ran ET. So we had this new receptionist in the ILM reception area, and I said to her, "Well, what did you think of the movies?" And well, she didn't want to really say. She didn't want. She was new and stuff. But I finally got out of her. Well, my husband and we liked E.T. And I thought, oh crap! I can see it now. I can see what's going to happen. It's going to trounce Dragon Slayer, which it did. It trounced everything. In
Yeah.
fact, I was there the day when it beat Star Wars for the most uh, highest film grossing movie of all time. And somebody turned to George and said, "What do you think of that? Knocking Star Wars out?" He
Yeah.
said, "Good." now then maybe leave me alone.
Yeah, exactly.
Hilarious.
So
Yeah.
it was a surprise to us, you know. And then we had a thing called the free speech board, which hung outside editorial in the D hallway. And everybody, including George, would stop and see what silly thing was put up. There were all kinds of things. What Muhammad Ali is going to look like when he's 70. He was probably 30 then. And and then there was remember there was this article saying that in the future, houses were going to cost as much as $200,000. And we thought, well, that's impossible. How could that happen? That's ridiculous. How could a house cost $200,000? And then there would be, you know, somebody would put up the grosses for ET, and they were just like, what is going on? You know, it's just going crazy. And then there was Howard the Duck. And
Wow.
I remember the headline in Variety. It said, Duck cooks Price's goose. You know, Frank Price, I think it was. He was the head of the studio that had financed that. And it was like, you know, he was done for.
Oh no.
That's actually Gabe's favorite movie.
No.
I'm just playing.
You know, it is a well-made movie, and
oh man,
it had a lot of problems.
Yeah.
There was and it was George's buddies, you know, Gloria and Willard.
yeah.
Who wrote American Graffiti and a bunch of other good stuff.
Yeah.
But he was not a sure of himself director, Willard. And I remember one day he fired everyone on the movie except for Joe Johnston. He couldn't fire Joe Johnston. But he fired everybody. And then the next day he hired them all back. You know, it was just like, this is not looking good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh no. Yeah, they brought him back in the Marvel movies, right? They have him in a little scene where this collector has a bunch of stuff. And you see Howard the Duck kind of in a little in a little cage. It's silly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, Bill, also, I mean, we love these stories. These are great, and there's a bunch of them in your book, right?
That's right. I have it right here, and you have it too. You beat me to it. There it is.
There it is.
So you can find it on Amazon. You can find it in bookstores. Any bookstore can order it. And it is not all about Star Wars, but it is about a life making motion pictures. I've worked on about 25 of them or so. Quite a few of them are major motion pictures that you've all seen and a lot of people love. So it's my story about growing up and figuring out that I wanted to make movies and making them, and then working for Lucas and working on his films and all his buddies' films, meeting, you know, some pretty cool people, and you know, working in a creative environment where you've got people leaving you notes about they're so, you know, they're an artist. I remember this one guy, he was looking for an element and he thought I had it, and I kept telling him I didn't have it. The next morning on my desk there was this drawing. This is a really kind of fabulous drawing of him not only falling down drunk, but being partially held up by two beautiful women. And he's saying, you know, I was so out of it. I screwed up last night. Sorry. It was just fun to get stuff like that. You know, that's not in the normal working environment. And, you know, and I worked with John Knoll. John Knoll and his brother created Photoshop. I mean, this is like, you know, when John wasn't working at ILM, he was at home inventing stuff. And well, that was one of the biggest. If there's a bigger software program, it's got to be, you know, Windows. I don't know what else would be bigger.
No. Photoshop.
And we used to kid when he started as an intern, and then we found out how bright he was, and we used to kid, you know, John has an older, smarter brother. and he lives back in Michigan. If you could imagine anybody being more brilliant than this guy.
I remember his story. I remember his story.
He's a big guy. He's the head of all creative at ILM at the Presidio, and
Yeah.
and he's a really unassuming, nice guy, and he is as surprised as the stuff he came up with as you are. And he would say, I don't really know how to write a program, but I was home on my Apple II, and I did this last night, and what do you think? It was just like, wow.
Yeah, he's responsible for Rogue One. I mean, it's because of him that that movie happened.
Yeah, and he's the only guy I ever heard George say. Of course, he's a genius. You don't get that much.
Yeah.
Hey, Bill, you also have a website, right? You have a website where people
So
can,
I have an author site
right?
called, well, you can just go to billkimberlin.com, and it switches over to Inside the Star Wars Empire, and it has some videos, and it has, there's an interesting little documentary there from Nova of putting the SB-19 together, and then there's a part of a documentary I made on the making of Jurassic Park, and then there's a trailer, which is the opening of Roger Rabbit, which is very funny. And then there's these pictures, these guys are pretending that I'm like paparazzi and they're trying to hide their faces, because they're rolling this stuff, across the studio a lot all the time. And, when you go on the site, you can scroll through that and see it. And then I have a Facebook page, which is called, hey, I didn't know you could do that. There's that drawing. Go back a little bit.
There it is.
That right there is the guy apologizing for bothering me. That was on my desk. And if you look at it closely, he's a pretty talented guy.
That's
funny.
And that's Bob Hoskins, who's working in. This is what happens to you when a human enters Toontown. Gets on an elevator, and the elevator goes 300 miles an hour, and it scrunts to the floor just like a tune would be.
That's funny.
So, like you say, there's that, and then there's Inside the Star Wars Empire Facebook page that has some other things about movies and whatever I can come up with to amuse people.
Yeah. Oh, and here's some of your other movie.
So I worked on that Jack Johnson film there. That was my documentary.
Here's the Newsweek.
There's the Newsweek. If you look close, you can see a big smeary thumbprint where they grabbed it out of my hands. With a freaking rave review of it, which was exciting to get.
Yeah,
for sure.
Man, Bill. Well, it's just such an honor to be able to hear these stories coming from you. Like you said, I mean, you literally shaped our childhood, right? Really, how you mentioned that. Because really, we grew up on all of these, and the fact that you worked on even the later movies, right? Like Jurassic Park. Although now it seems old now, right? It's 1990, what, 92 in Jurassic Park came out?
I don't remember. 91, 90.
Yeah.
It's just, that was the breakthrough movie. It changed everything in Hollywood.
Yeah, the digital.
Yeah. All of these movies, I mean, were groundbreaking if you really think about it. I mean, from Revenge of the Jedi to, Roger Rabbit to,
Yeah, nobody had ever done anything like Roger Rabbit. In fact, Spielberg sent us, he asked my boss to make a test to see if this could be done. And Ken went out on the main stage and got a car and had a twinging light bulb and had headlights and had Jessica, a scene which Jessica is going to be put in, and also Roger, and the characters had to walk through the headlights. The animated characters had to walk through the headlights, and they had to be under the swinging lamp, gradually throwing light on them. And it was a moving camera, and it was like, okay, if they can do that, then we can do this movie. And by God, we sent him the thing, and we got it back, comped the animation with it, sent it to Spielberg, and he was just blown away. It just proved what they could do.
Yeah.
And so they got the okay from the studio, and the rest is history.
Amazing. No, and
Yeah.
it's again just so cool to hear. You hear all these amazing stories, and I mean, guys, if you want to hear more of these stories, definitely pick up Bill's book. I'm sure you'll get a kick out of a lot of other stories, right, Bill?
Yeah, there's tales of my growing up in a little town called Boonville, California, and I say Boonville to Hollywood and back because I have a country house there now.
Oh,
And you know, I could go on and on. Boonville has its own language, and it's a jargon really. But an outsider is called a bright lighter.
oh, that's funny.
And a telephone is called a Bucky Walter because Bucky was the only man in town that had a telephone. And a horn of Z is a cup of coffee because a horn in Bootling is a cup, and Z was the guy that made the strongest coffee in town. And it just goes on like that. There's about 1,500 words, and it was created in the late 1800s so that people could speak. Men could speak in front of women without using offending language because it was all in a lingo,
Yeah.
and people could talk about outsiders, bright lighters,
Funny.
and they're not knowing what they're talking about. So
Is
now,
that
now it's just part of
California?
a lark.
Is that in California?
Yep.
Yeah. So it's about 2.5 hours north of San Francisco. It's a little wine valley. When I was a kid, it was sheep, timber, and summer camps. And now it's Pinot Noir, grapes, and wine tasting. But the thing is, locals are upset about this, but it keeps it agriculture. And, I'm fine with it. It's still a gorgeous place to hang out.
Yeah, I want to take my wife actually there, up in that area.
Yeah.
I'd love to take her up there.
If I'm in town, look me up.
I sure will, Bill. I sure will. That'd
Hey,
be
Bill,
great.
so another thing that we wanted to, obviously outside of the whole Hollywood thing and the you're a collector as well, right? Obviously we're on Collection Wars.
Yep.
What do you do
So
in
probably due to the model shop. I mean, whenever somebody came to visit, I'd take him to see theater because of the beautiful theater that George built. Because, directors spend their lives in these concrete bunkers they call editing rooms and the studio mixing theaters. So when they got the chance, George and Marcia, to build their own, they built the most beautiful screening room you ever saw. I never took anybody in there who didn't. First reaction wasn't wow.
Yeah.
And then the editing rooms were like executive offices. They all had, garden patios and, thick carpet. And so that whole experience is like getting, when he got hold of the means of production, he made a nice place. And the same with the ranch, a nice place to work.
Yeah.
About the collecting, so the model shop, it was more fun to take people to the model shop than a room full of computers. And they had all these fabulous artists making things like your Star Destroyer back then.
Yeah.
And so for Christmas, I went out and looking for the train I had as a kid, and they tried to sell me something. I said, no, I want the same thing as I had as a kid. I don't want the new fancy one. I want the old one. So that sent me to collectors. Well, you got to go to this guy. And I went into his train room and I was like, wow, look at this stuff. I didn't know, as a kid, you never think that there were trains before you. There's your train, but there were trains in the 40s and the 30s and the 20s and the teens. And so I kind of got into that, and I have trains. I have a train room in Boonville that has all original stuff, completely no repaints, no nothing, and some of it's quite scarce. And I know it's a relaxing thing. It's fun to do, and
Yep.
there's a lot of competition from other collectors trying to find this stuff.
Yeah, we're going to have to bring you back just to see your train collection. I would definitely be interested in seeing that. I know Rod Stewart's a really big train collector as well.
Yeah, I've seen some of his layouts and stuff. Yeah, he has. I mean, he has it built,
Yeah,
and it's modern. Everything in my room is authentic from the 20s or
yeah,
30s,
that'd be crazy to see.
and I've just gotten a couple new goodies.
That's
So
awesome. Good for you.
I look forward to going up there and seeing how that works.
So you have them sitting like in a library room?
I have an extra room. It's a 3-bedroom, 2-bath, Sea Ranch style house. I don't know if you've ever heard of Sea Ranch, but it's a 5,000-acre community, and they have restrictions. It has to look like an old barn. It's not supposed to look like a pink villa that some multimillionaire lawyer is going to. And so my house looks like that, in a grove of oak and madrone trees. And so it's a redwood house, so the walls are wood, and so I devoted a room to this, and then I have a room at the city house that's also got a bunch of them.
That's cool.
The thing is, you did the right thing. You build a building for your collection. I'm at that point, but I don't think I'm gonna. I have most of what I want. Occasionally, I find something.
Yeah, for sure.
No, but that's funny that you bring that up, that you wanted them as you remember them as a child, because that's what us Star Wars collectors now are all about, right? Like a lot of, especially like Michael, a lot of people that collect the old vintage Star Wars figures. Those are kind of the most meaningful things that people collect when it comes to Star Wars, because it takes them back to their childhood, and they want the original ones. They don't want these new ones that are coming out. They really focus.
Exactly. Yeah, that's my view. I mean, there's some history to these pieces. When you think about, I also collect the catalogs. So in the catalogs, you see the kid. He's circled the one he wants, and then he says, I want this one. Maybe gives it to his dad or something. And Lindbergh had a toy train. The Wright brothers, they didn't have a train, but they had a toy, and it was a French toy, and it had a propeller and a rubber band, and it would fly. And they said later, when they built their amazing ships, after people have been thinking about this for 3,000 or 4,000 years, these guys who had never been to college build these planes, and they say it was that toy that our father gave us that made us fascinated with flight.
Yeah.
And I understand that they took a small piece of the wing of the Wright brothers plane when they made the first venture to the moon, I think. And they put it on the spaceship.
Oh wow, I didn't know that.
I thought that was
Yeah.
cool.
That's a nice little touch. I didn't know
That's really cool. You know what's so cool about our show, Bill, is when me and Gabe got together and created this show, it was more than just the cool collections. It was the inspiration, and we've spanned it out to being able to interview awesome artists like you that create books that are like archives. I mean, it's people that want to get into the industry. It's like when somebody reads like your book, it's inspirational. It's gets these people, inspired to go and get into I was like you. I wanted to get into the film industry bad. I wanted to be a part of Lucasfilm. That's why I ended up, leaving in handcuffs. Yeah. They wouldn't let me in, so I jumped the fence. But all kidding aside, this is what our show is all about, and it's just been a blast being able to talk to people like you.
Yeah.
Well, it's I did get a couple of letters here lately because I've been doing a couple of shows,
Yep.
and saying, aside from the Star Wars, they got some lessons from me about life out of this book.
That's
And
awesome.
so I tried to put some of that in there too. I thought if you don't humanize it, if it isn't about someone and what they went through, then it's just name dropping, So
Yep.
I have my story in there for whatever value that is. I think film students should read it to know.
Absolutely.
Because if you want to get in the movie business, you can do it. You might not like it, but you go down to Los Angeles, you can get into the movie, especially now. There's so many jobs available because of Netflix and all this. So,
Oh, wow. I didn't think about that.
keep it in mind. Well, there's a part in my book where I talk. Somebody wrote, the famous author Hunter S. Thompson, if he would give some advice to his college-age kid, and so he told him, "Look, don't just go after goals. Find out how you like to live. Find out what makes you happy. City, country, Italy, wherever it is, forest ranger. Find out what makes you happy. And then try and figure out how to make a living so you can live like that." And that, I think, is great advice, because there's a lot of disappointed doctors and lawyers who just went after that goal, or their family said, do this. And they're not happy. Lawyers being the largest group of.
Hey, Bill. Let me let you know what Gabe's full-time job is. He's
I'm an attorney.
Well, the reason that I say that, what I have heard is that you spend your life preparing to go to court with a case, and it settles, and you never get to the fulfillment of it. And, unless you're like a courtroom attorney, then I would say that's completely different. And also, there's all kinds of lawyers that I'm sure.
Oh yeah.
Great practices.
I'm a trial attorney, so I'm in
So
there.
you're doing the real thing.
Sure. So for me, it's fun because it's almost like a performance to a certain extent, because I have to present a story, and I have
that's the big exception. You're the one that I can see. Yeah, I once thought I would either be a forest ranger or an attorney. I kind of like the idea of being an attorney, but if you could actually practice, you could actually get in there and do something.
Man, I wanted to be a forest ranger, Bill. That's a true story. I wanted to be a forest ranger, and then I decided I wanted to be a cinematographer. I wanted to get in the film industry, so crazy.
Well, I know a guy who said he's a dentist because that was the shortest line, when he was trying to put the line to the classes.
That's funny.
No, but it is funny though. I do see that in my profession. There's a lot of unhappy attorneys because you're right. They go into it with a certain mentality, and realize you enjoy other stuff. Myself included. I figured out in the last 2 years that I really enjoy this stuff, and I love film, and I love this kind of side of it. But I also enjoy what I do. I really do enjoy jury trials, and it's
I can see that. Yeah, I can see that. The people that don't have any intense interests, I find them kind of boring.
Yeah. Absolutely.
And you can call it a hobby or whatever you want to call it, but is collecting Rembrandts, is that a hobby? I sometimes I think the hobby is overused a little bit.
Yeah,
I understand.
It's not a hobby.
I understand.
Yeah, no, it's definitely more of a passion, and I think on kind of this level and some of the collectors we bring on, it's definitely more of an obsession almost, right?
Yeah. We lean on each other about our problems. when it comes
I
to,
haven't come up with a name for it yet, but I don't like hobby. I think I'm
Yeah,
doing something else.
oh, I agree. I
exactly.
understand what you're saying.
Yeah.
Yep.
So, Bill, but thank you so much. We want to be respectful of your time. I know, we don't want to. Our show sometimes could go on, and we're here 4 hours later, and we're still going. But we want to be
Yeah.
respectful of your time, Bill.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, and
Really.
my dinner. I'm starting to think about dinner real seriously. So.
Pizza.
Yeah. But thank you so much, Bill, for jumping on with us. Michael, any last questions?
Well, Bill, I would like to absolutely say, of course, thanks for coming on Collection Wars. It's awesome to be able to call you friend now, Bill, and definitely going to keep in touch. And absolutely want you to know that you're welcome back. I would love to show your collection if you're okay with that when it comes to those trains. I personally love that stuff. I do have a few trains myself that I keep in my main house, and I love that stuff. So I would love for our viewers to be able to see that.
Yeah.
That would be interesting. What? So you have collectors of other
Yeah.
things
Oh yeah,
besides
absolutely. Yeah,
Yeah.
we've had
movie
Barbie
or
collections on and
Yeah.
all that stuff. But yeah, we're of course 85% of our content is Star Wars.
yeah.
But we've my wife has a huge 50s, 60s, and 70s Barbie collection, and so we've had that on our show, for the
Mhm.
wives, But yeah,
Yeah,
so
cool.
yeah,
Yeah. Our buddy has a really big Muppets collection.
yeah.
Like replicas of the Muppets and stuff. So yeah, no, we're definitely not limited to just Star Wars. We love the passion that comes with collecting itself, and yeah, of course, we would love to have other collections as well.
However, this type of stuff that we're doing tonight is hands down my favorite, Bill, because just being able to just sit here and listen to your fantastic stories in your career, I mean, congratulations. I mean, it's just absolutely to be able to, I mean, I envy you. I mean, I look at somebody like you I mean, not many people can have that story. And like Gabe said, 20 years, you get to carry around that really cool little trophy that you got there. And I mean, there's a lot of story behind that, a lot of hard work that went into all that stuff. And it's just badass.
Yeah.
I'll tell you, there was a time when you couldn't go to a cocktail party without, once they figured out that you worked for Lucasfilm or something, that was the only conversation, that would be at the dinner table. And so sometimes I would say, I work in, technical jobs.
Exactly. I understand that. Yeah.
Go on and on about it. But, then at other times, someone would say, "Oh, you have a creative job," because they're like a bookkeeper or something.
Yeah.
And that did strike me as, yeah, I do have a creative job, and that's not everybody has that. So whatever kind of creative job you're doing, I think, including lawyers, Lincoln was a lawyer. One of my favorite stories about, is his whole career before he ever got into, politics and all.
Mhm.
And so if you can get a creative job, that is a bonus, as
Yeah.
I think we all know.
For
Yeah.
sure.
I've actually, Bill, and we could talk about this a little bit after we end the show, but I actually have used a Lincoln story in my closing arguments about him representing a British soldier that was charged with murder, and they asked him, like, why would you defend him? Obviously, he's he's charged with murder and all that stuff, and he would say that's what our system is about. It's about giving him that benefit of the doubt, and whether he's guilty or not, everyone deserves the fair trial. So
Exactly right. That's what that's what's different
no,
about this country, and it goes back before Lincoln, and of course, British law we inherited,
Yeah.
as a starting point.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
Oh, and I totally misspoke. Not British. It was a Southerner that he was, I believe, right? That he was representing. I'd have to go back and look at my notes.
Yeah, that was a few trials back, huh?
Yeah, I have to research it. So thank you so much, Bill. But like I said, it's not only your job is just not only creative. I think because we had a couple people so far on the show that have worked on these the Kenner figures, and like we had Kurt Thatcher on here and Tony McVeigh, and what you guys did is you shaped a generation. I mean, whether you don't see it like that or not, you did, because there wasn't a single kid in my generation, which let me pull this up. That's why I had this poster. There's not a single person in our generation who didn't have pretty much the poster, that epic one of that last scene in Return of the Jedi. That
I've got it. I've got it right here. I could walk you right to it.
Yeah, here, let me bring this up. And again, whether you see it like that or not, you really did. You shaped a generation. And there's, again, even though obviously it's a representation of that scene, I mean, there's, again, not a single person that I know in my generation that doesn't know that. And
when
all the films, you really have shaped a whole generation, though.
Yeah.
When George decided he was going to do the restoration and then go on and make other films, I thought to myself, what kid today wants to see the movies that their parents liked? I mean, how likely is that?
Yeah.
Well, I was wrong about that.
Yeah.
Because what kept it alive, there was a period there where I went to a lot of open houses. You couldn't go into a kid's bedroom without seeing the videotape and then the DVD and the posters and all this. It kept it alive for them. Yeah. And so when it finally came back around and young fathers and mothers were taking their kids to see Star Wars, they were interested, because they had some sense of it. And that's like what I was saying about, if you don't have some sense of it in your life, that there was somebody, your neighbor or somebody was in the movie business, it's kind of hard to imagine yourself doing that. And, like you see a breakthrough women in architecture or as attorneys or engineers or whatever, and many times their father, someone in their family, made it real for them because they knew about it. Yep. They were doing it. They were architects. You can be an architect too.
Yep.
Yeah.
Exactly.
But yeah, so thank you again, Bill. Again, not only for all the work that you've done throughout the years, but for hanging out with us and talking about them and joining us tonight. Really, really appreciate it.
Happy to do it. If you ever get to Boonville, you got my phone number.
Yep, absolutely, and I will be getting to Boonville.
There you go. All right, Bill. So yeah, we need to have you back sometime to show your train collection.
I would love that. Yeah. I would love that.
Yep.
Absolutely. I might want to actually see it before we get you back on the show, but we'll talk about that after the show. and to all our viewers again on a late Saturday, thanks for your evening, and we love having you guys jumping on and watching our show. And Gabe, it's always a pleasure. As a co-host, man, you're awesome, man. And thank you so much for your hard work on the edits and what you do to pull up, for these awesome people that we have on our show. You do a great job on that. Thanks for your time for that too, Gabe.
Appreciate that, Michael.
Yeah.
So everybody, we'll see you next week. Same time, same channel.